Hello. I would like to explore the concept of transdisciplinary thinking. What does this mean? One way of understanding this concept is to compare this with similar concepts that have this part, namely interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. These two are relatively familiar words. This is not so familiar. So let's try to understand this using these two. When we say interdisciplinary, we mean that which lies at the intersection between two disciplines. So you have one discipline and another discipline, there is some amount of overlap. And studying that area of overlap is interdisciplinary. So for instance, you could have biology and chemistry. What lies at the intersection between biology and chemistry is biochemistry. You have neuroscience and you have linguistics. What lies at the intersection between neuroscience and linguistics is neurolinguistics. You have mathematics and you have linguistics. What lies at the intersection is mathematical linguistics. And you have many such hyphenated disciplines. Some of them are in fact recognized as legitimate disciplines on their own right, but these are all interdisciplinary pursuits, interdisciplinary disciplines, so to speak. When you say multidisciplinary, what you are talking about is bringing together many disciplines, multiple disciplines or multiple fields to investigate a single question or problem. So there is a question that you want to investigate or a problem. And you want to understand it from the perspective of many disciplines, multiple disciplines. That will be multidisciplinary. To take an example, take something like protein folding in biology. Protein folding, in order to understand this, you need biology, you need to understand chemistry, you need to understand physics, you need to understand math, all these. So protein folding is a multidisciplinary problem. Take another case. We want to understand consciousness. To understand consciousness, we use psychology, we use neuroscience, we use philosophy, we use computer science, and well, computer science is a branch of mathematics. You could also include mathematics. So The basic idea here is that you need to bring together many disciplines to understand something. Most problems in medicine are of this type. They are multidisciplinary. In fact, most interesting questions that are relevant for today's world are really multidisciplinary problems, questions. So dividing up knowledge into different disciplines and different discipline groups and specializing in one and not knowing anything about the other is very counterproductive. So these are concepts of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. What does it mean to say transdisciplinary? When we say trans, we are talking about going above the level of individual disciplines to an abstract. Where the distinctions between different disciplines at this level do not matter. The disciplinary boundaries are, so to speak, ignored or crossed. They are not visible at this level, they are visible only at this level. That doesn't mean these distinctions are not important, but we are moving to a level where these boundaries no longer exist. To understand what this means, this notion of transdisciplinarity, we need to understand two basic concepts. One of them is abstraction, and the other concept is generalization. Abstraction is this movement that I described, moving above the level of concreteness, specificity to an abstract level. Generalization is this movement. As you spread out more and more and encompass more and more examples, you are generalizing. So transdisciplinarity involves both these. In a certain sense, mathematics involves both these, abstraction and generalization. Let me take an example. Suppose I were to ask you, here are two objects. What do they have in common? Well, these are two completely different objects. This is a book. This is a children's instruments box. This is red. This is yellow. This has letters in it. Well, this also has letters in it. This is a visiting card holder. This is made out of metal. This is also made out of metal, but this is not made out of metal. This has no letters in it. What do these three objects have in common? I think most of us would immediately see, let me also include these. What do these and those previous three objects have in common? What they have in common is the rectangular shape. By picking out rectangular shape and ignoring the other properties of these individual entities that divide them, for example, the color, I'm ignoring the color, I'm ignoring weight, I'm ignoring size, and many other things are completely ignored, the texture and whatever you can add. I'm just focusing on this. I have now made an abstraction, and then I'm going to call it rectangle. Those objects that I showed you are concrete objects, but I have now picked out one of those traits, the rectangleness of all these objects, and made that into a kind of object itself. Rectangle is an object. Where does it reside? It resides here. Okay? It is above the level of those particular objects at a interdisciplinary level. And Plato thought about this movement as transcending, that is, rising above the level of details. And he thought that an object such as rectangle or square or circle lived in a different world, and he called it transcendent world. And the basic idea was that it's an abstract world. Now, in order to do that, in order to abstract away the rectangleness of those objects to create a world of mathematical objects, we needed to ignore a large number of details. And then you can ask, what is this object? Well, notice you can represent a rectangle like this, or you can represent it like this. This is a two-dimensional object. It has material inside it, some kind of material. And what I have done in moving from here to here is ignoring this part and focusing on the edge. So in a sense, this object has two traits. One is it has an interior, this part. It also has a boundary and an exterior. Exterior is here, and interior is here, and this is the boundary or the edge that divides the interior from the exterior. And by representing it like this, I am now ignoring the interior completely. So whether the shape is like this or like that or like this, so this has some holes. The interior has these holes, but that doesn't matter. We are not talking about the interior, we're talking about this boundary, this edge. That's a further level abstraction. You are talking about from the rectangular shape, we are now moving on to the edge. And the edge itself is an abstraction. Not the edge of any particular object, but the edgeness of the rectangle. You can also think about the same way, think about circles. A circular disc, a DVD has an interior, a boundary, and an exterior. But now we're going to ignore the interior and represent this as just the boundary. This is the abstraction of the circular shape with just the edge, with no attention to the interior. Spanish has two different words for this. This is a circular disc, and this is just the circumference of the circle. This is a one-dimensional object. This is a two-dimensional object. This is a one-dimensional object. This is a two-dimensional object. Now we have performed an abstraction. These guys, circle and the rectangle and the square, etc., live in this transcendent world. That's the abstraction. Now, having done that, let us abstract it further, generalize it, and see what happens. The strategy that we're using is asking the question, what do things have in common? And the answer is abstracted as a kind of entity. So let's take this object. That's a right angle triangle. This is an isosceles triangle, and this one is neither right angle triangle nor isosceles triangle. What do these have in common? The moment you ask that question, we have moved away from the level of details to the level of triangles. And how did I get there? By asking the question, what do these have in common? And I'm picking out the trait, the common trait, to a higher level. Let us generalize further. Let's also include rectangles, squares, parallelograms, pentagons, and say, what do these have in common? Now you're moving to a next level, and we call it polygon. Notice at this level, you have 3 edges, but now when you move to this level, the number of edges do not matter. Only the straightness of the edges matter. Well, let's include more objects. What do these have in common? Now you don't have straight objects. Okay? So we'll say this is a closed figure. Whether this is just pure boundary now. Whether the boundaries have straight lines or not is irrelevant. So we're including not only polygons but also things like circles, ellipses, and a whole bunch of shapes like this for which we may not have any names. This movement is the abstraction, and now we have created an object, and all these objects are instances of that object, that transcendent, transdisciplinary, like this is still within geometry. But the specificities have been ignored. Let's pursue this path a little more. In some sense, all these objects that we have been looking at have been visual. Okay? So you can see a triangular shape, you can see a circular shape, and so on. And all of them have line as the boundary, line as that which separates the interior from the exterior. Now, we have line in geometry. But we have line in statistics as well. So we talk about linear correlation, and we express linear correlation with a line like that. This is the linear positive correlation, and this is the linear negative correlation. This is a non-linear correlation because it's a curved line, not a straight line. What do these lines have in common? The line in geometry and the line in statistics. These lines do not refer to visual entities. So if you say something like there is a correlation between one's age and height among human beings. Okay, let's say this is height, and this is age, and is it of this shape or is it of this shape? You will agree that it begins to go up first as age goes up, and then after some time, let's say about the age you are 20 or so, it remains steady horizontal for some time. After 50 years or so, it drops a little bit. So that's a line, and you have represented the relation between age and height as a line. What do these have in common? The moment you bring line into that notion, line not as a visual object, no longer part of geometry, you have moved up one level further. Now we are talking about a transdisciplinary concept of lines not restricted to geometry or statistics. The same way you can talk about space. Space here is visual space. But if you're talking about the space of probabilities, the space in which species can occur, the multi-dimensional space in which species occur, then we are talking about space at the transdisciplinary level. So for instance, you can say, let's take Zen as a human being, and this human being has age as a trait, as a dimension like this, and age is, let us say, 40, and this person has height, and let us say a person's height is 5 feet 6 inches. The person has eyes, and the number of eyes for this person is 2. The person has legs. How many legs? 2, and so on. And you can keep adding these traits. Each of these would be a dimension or an axis. You could also call it coordinate if you wish. So there are multiple axes, multiple dimensions for a person. And this person, you can say, is a point. So you can say Zen is an entity that exists in a multi-dimensional space. These are the dimensions of that space. The moment you say that, you're using a transdisciplinary concept of space. You are no longer talking about geometry per se, visual geometry per se. You could call it geometry, but it's no longer a geometry of the visual shapes. It's a geometry of these traits as well. They cut across all disciplinary boundaries. This notion of space would apply to not just to mathematics, but also to physics, to biology, to human sciences, history, everything. That is a true transdisciplinary concept. And to arrive at this concept, we have done two things. We have generalized, and we have also applied abstraction. Generalization and abstraction are the two fundamental characteristics of transdisciplinary thinking. And a telling example of transdisciplinary thinking is actually mathematics itself. At the heart of mathematics are these two traits. Let me take a few more examples to give you a feel for what it is like to think transdisciplinarily. So, as I said, transdisciplinary thinking is thinking in terms of ideas, concepts that cut across disciplinary boundaries. Let us take structure of atom. Which discipline does it belong to? Well, it belongs to the discipline called physics. How about the structure of molecules? It belongs to the discipline that we call chemistry. And go up one further level, structure of cell or structure of skeleton. That belongs to the discipline that we call biology. How about structure of a sentence? Sentence structure, that belongs to the discipline that we call linguistics. How about structure of a poem? Structure of a sonnet, for example. That belongs to literary studies. How about structure of business organization. That belongs to management. So these are all discipline internal notions of structure. So you could ask, what is the structure of an atom? You are inside physics. What is the structure of a water molecule? You are inside chemistry. But now you go up, such that the notion structure applies to all these different notions of structure, and you ask the question, what is structure? And you're not talking about any particular disciplines, but this abstract concept called structure. That is another instance of transdisciplinary concept. So we talked about two notions, two transdisciplinary notions, namely space and line first. Not the visual space, not the visual line. Then we talked about the notion structure, again a notion that cuts across disciplinary boundaries. How about the notion function? We can talk about the function of proteins, the function of the skeleton, the function of blood, and so on. You can talk about the function of an administrative unit in an organization. Those, if you are specific about the particular context in which that notion occurs, you're functioning within disciplines or discipline internal notions of function. But now you can ask the question, what is function? Regardless of whether you are in biology or in sociology or psychology, doesn't matter. That would be an example of the transdisciplinary notion of function. Similarly, if you ask the question, what is a system? It doesn't matter which particular discipline it is, I want to know what a system is. And there are many people who are studying actually many different types of systems. And we hear about notions like linear systems, non-linear systems. There is what is called non-linear dynamics that applies to system study of systems, complex adaptive systems, learning systems, and so on. These are all systems, studies of systems that are not bound to in particular disciplines. These are all transdisciplinary notions. A few more examples. Okay, take the notion correlation. You have correlation in physics, you have correlation in chemistry, you have correlation in biology, you have correlation in linguistics, you have correlation in just about every discipline that you can think of. To give you an example, we already looked at the correlation between age and height. What that means is that if you know the age of a person, you can approximately predict the height of that person. So for example, if you know that a person is 2 months old, we know this person could not be 5 feet tall. But if the person is 30, well, it could be within the range of 2 feet and 8 feet. And what's the most likely height? Well, around 5 feet. 8 feet is possible, but extremely unlikely. 3 feet is possible, again rare. So all these are instances of correlations, which means that if you know the value of one of these variables, you know the value of the other variable. That's what it means. Exactly the same thing in mathematics. This is diameter, and this is this is circumference. If you know the value of one of them, you know the value of the other. There is an equation that gives you this relation. That's a correlation, except we don't use the word correlation when you are in geometry. But let's use the word correlation to refer to this as well. Not only this correlation, but also that correlation. Then correlation becomes a transdisciplinary notion. It cuts across all disciplinary boundaries. Experiment. If you're thinking about doing experiments on the social behavior of Drosophila, you are referring to a particular field. If you are doing experiments to study the nature of materials, you are in material science. If you're doing experiments on humans, human mind, you are in the domain of psychology. But the notion experiment itself is a transdisciplinary notion. It doesn't apply to any particular disciplines. Theory. Well, Newton's theory is in physics. The heliocentric theory is in astronomy. Darwin's evolutionary theory is in biology. But what is a theory? Okay. A theory such that it applies to physics, to chemistry, to biology, to linguistics, to mathematics. Number theory. What is a theory such that number theory, Newton's theory, heliocentric theory, and evolutionary theory are all theories? That notion of theory is a transdisciplinary notion of theory. Prediction. Prediction is the logical consequence of certain statements. So, given Newton's theory, you can predict, okay, through classical deductive reasoning and combination of reasoning and logic and mathematics, you can predict the correlation between length and period in Galileo's pendulum. That Galileo had a law that states that as the length of a pendulum increases, its period of oscillation also increases. This is an observational generalization that is predicted by Newton's theory. The notion prediction in this sense means logical consequence. Math does the same thing. In Euclidean geometry, you have a set of axioms, you have a set of definitions. Okay, so this is a theory, mathematical theory, and this is theory of physics. The logical consequence of these axioms and definitions of Euclidean geometry are called theorems. What logically follows from these. So the word prediction and the word theorem mean the same thing. They're exactly the same concept. But we tend to use the word prediction when we are in science and the word theorem when we are in mathematics. But suppose you are not talking about whether it is mathematics or physics or biology or linguistics and use the word prediction to mean simply logical consequence. That is a transdisciplinary notion. If you use the word prediction in that sense, the same thing applies to moral theory. So you postulate a set of principles like axioms, and the logical consequences would be moral judgments. That's also a prediction. Notice that we have now gone above the level of physics, mathematics, and ethics to an abstract level, a transdisciplinary level, where the concept of predictions would apply to all these different disciplines. That is what we mean by transdisciplinary thinking. And the kind of thinking and the kind of reasoning and the conceptual clarification that applies to that level of transdisciplinary concepts is what we call transdisciplinary research. Research that cuts across disciplinary boundaries. Thank you.